Hercule Poirot and the Murder That Solved. Another Murder, Chapter 1. The letter from Thornwood Manor. The envelopes arrived on Mondays. Each week, without fail, the crisp white rectangle would appear on the silver tray, addressed in the same meticulous handwriting that had become as familiar to Hercule Poirot as his own. This particular Monday in late autumn, however, the envelope bore a different hand. Hurried, urgent strokes that immediately captured the detective's attention. "Hastings, observe," Poirot said, holding the envelope delicately between his thumb and forefinger. "What do you make of this correspondence?" Captain Arthur Hastings, who had been comfortably ensconced in an armchair with the morning paper, glanced up with mild interest. Their friendship, spanning decades, had taught him that Poirot rarely asked a question without purpose. "Seems ordinary enough," Hastings remarked, adjusting his position to better examine the letter. "Though not your usual correspondent, I'd wager, précisément." Poirot's eyes lit with approval. "The handwriting is not steady. Observe the pressure applied to the downstrokes. This person was in a state of considerable agitation." Poirot's fingertips, as fastidious as their owner, traced the perimeter of the envelope before retrieving a small silver letter opener from his desk. The blade slid beneath the flap with surgical precision, preserving the integrity of both envelope and contents. The letter inside was brief, the words crammed together as though racing against time. "Monsieur Poirot, I write to you in desperate circumstances. A death has occurred at Thornwood Manor, which the authorities have deemed natural, but I am convinced is murder most carefully orchestrated. I fear more lives are at risk, including my own. Please come at once. The train to Little Thornwood leaves Paddington at 2:15. I shall send a car to meet you. With urgency, Evelyn Blackwood." "Well?" Hastings inquired, noting the slight narrowing of Poirot's eyes, a telltale sign that his friend's formidable intellect had engaged. "We are summoned, mon ami," Poirot replied, his accent becoming more pronounced, as it often did when his interest was piqued. "To Thornwood Manor, where a death that appears natural may be something altogether more sinister." Hastings perked up immediately. Since his return from Argentina, these adventures with Poirot had become precious diversions from the monotony of civilian life. Natural death disguised as murder? Surely it's the other way around, old chap. Poirot's moustache twitched with gentle amusement. "No, no, Hastings, I have quoted precisely. And therein lies our first curiosity. Why would Miss Blackwood phrase it so? A slip of the pen, perhaps, or something more significant?" He tapped the letter thoughtfully. "The little grey cells, they are already at work." Within the hour, Poirot had George, his valet, pack a valise with meticulously folded clothes and the various unguents and potions required for his toilette. By 1 o'clock, the two friends were seated in a first-class compartment bound for Little Thornwood, a village nestled in the rolling countryside some 2 hours from London. "What do you know of Thornwood Manor?" Hastings asked as the train pulled away from the platform. Poirot adjusted the perfectly centered crease in his trousers before responding. "It is the ancestral home of the Blackwood family, who made their fortune in shipping during the previous century. The current master of Thornwood is Sir Richard Blackwood, a widower with, if memory serves, 2 children, a son, Gerald, and a daughter, Evelyn. Our correspondent, Ah, so it's the daughter who's written to you, and who's died. That, my friend, is what we shall discover. Poirot's eyes gleamed with the anticipation of the intellectual challenge ahead. But consider, why would Miss Blackwood believe a natural death to be murder when all others are satisfied? What has she observed that the authorities have missed? The remainder of the journey passed with Poirot, lapsing into contemplative silence, broken only by occasional murmurs in French that Hastings knew better than to interrupt. As promised, a sleek black Daimler awaited them at Little Thornwood Station, driven by a stiff-backed chauffeur who introduced himself as Parker. "Miss Blackwood sent me to collect you, sir," Parker said, touching his cap respectfully. "There's been another development at the manor this morning." Poirot's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Of what nature, if I may inquire?" "It's not my place to say, sir," Parker replied, his face a mask of professional detachment. "But Miss Blackwood is most distressed. She said to tell you that your services are needed more urgently than ever." The drive to Thornwood Manor wound through country lanes bordered by ancient oaks shedding their copper leaves. When the manor finally came into view, it presented an imposing silhouette against the fading afternoon light. A grand Jacobean structure of red brick and mullioned windows, surrounded by formal gardens now surrendering to autumn's touch. As they approached the entrance, Hastings noticed a police constable standing near the doorway, notebook in hand, near the constable. A man in a tweed suit was gesticulating emphatically, his face flushed with apparent indignation. "Inspector Graves from Scotland Yard," Parker supplied, following Hastings's gaze. "Arrived this morning after they found Mr. Harrington." "And who is Mr. Harrington?" Poirot inquired, his attention now fully engaged. "Family solicitor, sir. Been handling the Blackwood affairs for decades." Parker's voice lowered. "Found dead in the library this morning. Apparent heart failure, they're saying, though Miss Blackwood—" He fell silent as the imposing front door swung open, revealing a tall, slender woman with striking auburn hair pulled back in a severe style that emphasized her pale, angular features. Despite her youth, she could not have been more than 30. There was a gravity to her bearing that suggested burdens beyond her years. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, extending a trembling hand. "Thank God you've come. I'm Evelyn Blackwood. Please come inside at once. There isn't a moment to lose." As they crossed the threshold into the grand entrance hall, Poirot cast his gaze upward to the vaulted ceiling, then methodically surveyed the space, noting the ancestral portraits, the polished oak staircase, the subtle signs of wealth maintained through generations. But it was the small detail that caught and held his attention. A single white glove dropped carelessly on the marble floor, its mate nowhere to be seen. "Tell me, mademoiselle," Poirot said softly, gesturing toward the solitary glove. "Does that belong to anyone in the household?" Evelyn Blackwood's eyes widened as she followed his gesture. "No," she whispered. "That's impossible. That glove belonged to my mother. She was buried wearing them 8 years ago." Chapter 2. The Second Death. Evelyn Blackwood's face had drained of what little color it possessed. Her trembling fingers reached for the white glove, but stopped short, as though afraid it might turn to vapor, or worse, reach back. "Impossible," she repeated. "Mother was buried with these gloves. I placed them on her hands myself." Poirot knelt with surprising agility for a man of his stature. Producing a handkerchief from his pocket, he carefully lifted the glove without touching it directly. "You are quite certain, mademoiselle?" "Absolutely certain. They were her favorites, French kid skin with pearl buttons." Evelyn's voice cracked. "This is what I meant in my letter, Monsieur Poirot. Strange things have been happening since Uncle Frederick died." Hastings glanced sharply at Poirot. "Uncle Frederick? I thought it was the solicitor who had died." "Two deaths," Poirot murmured, carefully folding the glove into his handkerchief. "The plot, it thickens, no?" He turned to Evelyn. "Perhaps, mademoiselle, you might introduce us to Inspector Graves before showing us to our rooms. Then, over tea, you shall tell us everything from the beginning." The introduction to Inspector Graves was predictably frosty. A barrel-chested man with thinning hair and the harried expression of someone perpetually behind schedule, he regarded Poirot with undisguised skepticism. "Mr. Poirot," he acknowledged curtly, "Scotland Yard has matters well in hand." Sir Richard was not pleased to learn his daughter had summoned a private detective. "It is always a pleasure to assist the official police," Poirot replied with a slight bow. "Often, what appears as two separate puzzles may be pieces of the same image. N'est-ce pas?" Graves's brow furrowed. "There's no puzzle here, merely unfortunate coincidence. Frederick Blackwood died of natural causes 3 weeks ago. Heart condition, well documented by his physician. And this morning poor Harrington, same thing. Elderly gentleman with weak hearts. Sad, but hardly mysterious. And yet, the glove of Madame Blackwood appears as if by magic," Poirot observed mildly. "Housemaid probably found it while cleaning and left it there." Graves dismissed. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have statements to finish." As Graves strode away, Evelyn led Poirot and Hastings up the grand staircase. "He refuses to listen," she whispered. "But you will, won't you?" "Mademoiselle, Poirot always listens," he assured her with a gentle pat on her hand. After settling into their respective rooms, Poirot taking particular care to arrange his toiletries in perfect symmetry on the dressing table, they rejoined Evelyn in the west drawing-room for tea. The room was elegant but sombre, with heavy damask curtains partially drawn against the fading daylight. "Now," Poirot said, accepting a cup of tea with a nod of approval at its perfect amber hue, "tell us about your Uncle Frederick and his death." Evelyn glanced nervously at the door before speaking. "Uncle Frederick was my father's younger brother. He never married, dedicated his life to the family business, and lived here at Thornwood his entire life." She hesitated. 3 weeks ago he was found dead in his bed. Dr. Reynolds declared it heart failure. Not surprising for a man of 68 who enjoyed rich food and brandy. "But you had suspicions?" Poirot prompted. "Uncle Frederick had been anxious in the weeks before his death. He told me he was putting things right after all these years." Evelyn leaned forward. "The night before he died, I overheard him arguing with someone in the library. I couldn't make out the words, but he sounded frightened." Hastings frowned. "Did you see who he was arguing with?" "No. When I entered he was alone. Claimed he was rehearsing a speech for the shareholders' meeting. Her hands twisted in her lap. The next morning his valet found him dead. And now Mr. Harrington—" The door opened, cutting off her words. A tall, distinguished man with silver-streaked dark hair and a military bearing entered, his sharp gaze immediately finding Poirot. "So you're the detective my daughter has seen fit to summon behind my back," he said without preamble. "Sir Richard Blackwood, I must inform you that your services won't be necessary." Poirot rose with dignity. "Sir Richard, it is an honor. Your daughter's concern speaks to her devotion to your family. Her imagination speaks to too many detective novels." Sir Richard countered coldly. "My brother died of a weak heart, as did our solicitor. Tragic coincidences that Miss Blackwood has woven into some fantastical murder plot." "Father, please," Evelyn implored. "What about Mother's glove? How do you explain that?" A flicker of something, pain, fear, crossed Sir Richard's face before his expression hardened again. "Sentimentality and superstition. This house has enough ghosts without manufacturing more." A discreet cough announced the arrival of the butler, a dignified man with the impassive countenance of one who had witnessed decades of family drama without comment. "Dinner will be served in half an hour, Sir Richard. And Mr. Gerald has arrived from London. Thank you, Winters." Sir Richard turned back to Poirot. "You may stay the night, Mr. Poirot, but I expect you to leave on tomorrow morning's train. This is a house in mourning, not a stage for your detective theatrics." After Sir Richard departed, Evelyn's shoulders sagged. "I'm sorry. Father has been different since Uncle Frederick died. More agitated, less patient." "Who else is currently in residence at Thornwood Manor?" Poirot inquired, seemingly unperturbed by Sir Richard's dismissal. "My brother Gerald, who's just arrived. My cousin Diana, Uncle Frederick's goddaughter. Dr. Reynolds is staying for dinner, and Miss Harlow, my father's secretary. Mr. Harrington was supposed to stay the week." Evelyn's voice faltered. "He was here to discuss changes to Uncle Frederick's will." Poirot's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Changes, mademoiselle? Yes. Uncle Frederick made a new will just days before he died. Mr. Harrington was bringing the final version for formal reading tomorrow." Evelyn lowered her voice. "And now he's dead too, with the new will nowhere to be found. Most interesting," Poirot murmured, the tips of his fingers coming together in a familiar gesture that Hastings recognized as a sign of deepening engagement. "And what of the glove, mademoiselle? What significance might your mother's glove hold after all these years?" "I don't know," Evelyn confessed. "Mother's death was the beginning of Thornwood's darkness. She fell from the West Tower 8 years ago. The official ruling was accident, but..." The dinner gong sounded, cutting through her words like a knife. "Come," she said, rising with newfound composure. "You'll meet everyone at dinner. Watch them carefully, Monsieur Poirot. Someone in this house is a murderer. I'm certain of it." As they followed her from the room, Hastings whispered to Poirot, "3 deaths now. The mother, the uncle, and the solicitor. Plus, ça change, mon ami." Poirot replied softly, "The past is never truly buried, especially when someone has taken great pains to conceal it." In the grand dining room, illuminated by candelabra that cast more shadows than light, the residents of Thornwood Manor awaited, each face a mask, each bearing secrets that Poirot's little grey cells had already begun to unravel. Chapter 3. Dinner at Thornwood. The Thornwood Manor dining room exuded the sombre grandeur of a family that had weathered centuries of fortune and misfortune with equal stoicism. portraits of stern-faced Blackwood ancestors gazed down from mahogany-panelled walls, their eyes seeming to follow Poirot and Hastings as they entered. Sir Richard stood at the head of the long table, his posture military straight. To his right sat a woman in her 40s, with a face that might have been beautiful had it not been frozen in an expression of perpetual dissatisfaction. "Miss Harlow, my secretary," Sir Richard introduced tersely, as Winters directed Poirot and Hastings to their seats. "And Dr. Reynolds," he added, gesturing toward a thin, scholarly man with wire-rimmed spectacles, who gave a curt nod of acknowledgement. A young woman with striking platinum blonde hair and eyes of an unusual violet hue occupied the chair beside Hastings. Diana Blackwood, she supplied without waiting for an introduction, her voice carrying the languid drawl of the privileged classes. "Frederick's goddaughter. You must be the famous detective Evelyn has been raving about. Hercule Poirot. At Kentucky, your service, mademoiselle," Poirot replied with a slight bow before taking his seat. The final guest to join the table was Gerald Blackwood, who swept in with the casual arrogance of a man accustomed to making entrances. Tall like his father, but with none of Sir Richard's severity, Gerald possessed the kind of loose-limbed charm that suggested both athletic prowess and moral flexibility. "Sorry I'm late," he announced to no one in particular, dropping into the seat beside Evelyn. "Dreadful business with Harrington. London office is in an uproar." His gaze fell on Poirot, and his eyebrows rose. "And who might this be?" "Don't tell me, the great detective himself." "Gerald," Sir Richard warned, his voice low. "No, it's marvelous," Gerald insisted, reaching for his wine-glass. "Just what this dreary house needs, a mystery to solve. Tell me, Monsieur Poirot, do you find us all suitably suspicious?" Gerald, please," Evelyn murmured, her cheeks flushing. Poirot merely smiled benignly. "I find, Monsieur Blackwood, that in houses such as this, it is the things unspoken that speak the loudest." An uncomfortable silence followed as the first course was served, consommé with delicate herb dumplings. Poirot noted the precision with which Winters directed the two footmen, the younger one's hands trembling slightly as he served Miss Harlow. "I understand, Dr. Reynolds," Poirot said conversationally, breaking the silence, "that you attended both Monsieur Frederick and the unfortunate Monsieur Harrington." Dr. Reynolds dabbed his lips with his napkin. "That is correct. In both cases, the cause was identical, heart failure. Frederick had a documented history of cardiac issues. As for Harrington, well, he was 72 and under considerable stress." "Stress from what, might I ask?" Poirot inquired innocently. Before the doctor could answer, Sir Richard cut in. "Standard business matters, nothing of consequence." "Perhaps not to you, Richard," Diana interjected, twirling her wine-glass between slender fingers. "But Uncle Frederick certainly thought his new will was of consequence, important enough to change everything just days before his death." Gerald's eyes narrowed. "What do you know about the new will, Diana?" "Only what Uncle Frederick told me himself," she replied with a cat-like smile. "That he was setting matters right after all these years. Quite cryptic, wasn't it?" "Highly inappropriate dinner conversation," Miss Harlow declared, her first words of the evening delivered with clipped precision. "Mr. Harrington's body is barely cold." "Speaking of cold," Diana continued blithely, "isn't it peculiar how chilly the West Wing has become? especially near Aunt Victoria's old rooms. Almost as if, enough. Sir Richard's fist came down hard on the table, causing the silverware to jump. I will not have this macabre fascination with the past. My wife's death was a tragic accident. My brother died of natural causes, as did Harrington. There is nothing for Mr. Poirot to investigate, and I expect him to leave tomorrow, as agreed. Evelyn stared at her plate, fingers clutching her napkin. The glove, father. How do you explain Mother's glove? An uncomfortable silence descended once more, broken only by the soft clink of silverware against china, as the main course was served. Roast, pheasant with chestnut stuffing. I understand you were close to your uncle, Mademoiselle Evelyn, Poirot asked gently. Uncle Frederick was kind to me after Mother died, Evelyn replied, her voice steadying. He encouraged my interest in the family business when Father thought it unseemly. Unseemly is precisely the word, Sir Richard muttered. A young woman of your station has no business concerning herself with ledgers and profit margins. Yet your secretary is female, Poirot observed, glancing at Miss Harlow, whose thin lips compressed further. That is entirely different, sir, Richard retorted. Miss Harlow is employed in a professional capacity. My daughter's place is in managing this household, not meddling in affairs beyond her understanding. Like murder? Gerald suggested with a sardonic lift of his eyebrow. Come now, father, give Evie some credit. She may be right about old Frederick. He was behaving strangely those last weeks. Secretive, jumpy. I caught him in the old trophy room after midnight, searching through Mother's belongings we'd stored there. What? Evelyn turned to her brother in surprise. You never mentioned this. Gerald shrugged. Didn't seem important. Thought the old boy was getting sentimental in his dotage. But now, with Harrington gone too. He left the implication hanging in the air. This is preposterous, Dr. Reynolds protested. I examined both bodies thoroughly. Natural causes, nothing more. And yet, Poirot mused, 2 men connected to a new will die before it can be read. And a glove belonging to a woman 8 years deceased appears mysteriously in the entrance hall. Coincidence, perhaps, but Poirot does not trust coincidence. Diana's violet eyes glittered with what might have been amusement. I adore this, she declared. It's like one of those murder mystery weekends, only with real corpses. Diana, Miss Harlow exclaimed, appalled. What? Diana challenged. We're all thinking it. Uncle Frederick knew something worth changing his will over, something worth killing for, apparently. Sir Richard rose abruptly. I will not have this conversation at my dinner table. Miss Harlow, a word in my study, if you please. He stalked from the room, his secretary following like a shadow. As the dessert, a trifle that no one seemed inclined to eat, was served, Hastings noticed Poirot's eyes following the interaction between the remaining diners. Gerald lighting a cigarette with affected nonchalance. Diana watching him with calculating eyes. Evelyn staring into space. And Dr. Reynolds checking his pocket, watch repeatedly. I believe, Poirot announced suddenly, that I shall retire early. The journey has been fatiguing. He rose with a slight bow. But first, perhaps Dr. Reynolds might show me where Mr. Harrington was discovered this morning. For professional curiosity only, you understand. The doctor hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. The library, this way. As they left the dining room, Hastings heard Diana's voice trailing behind them. £10 says the detective doesn't make it to morning. Thornwood has a way of silencing those who ask too many questions. Her laughter, brittle and hollow, echoed through the halls like a warning. Chapter 4. Secrets in the Library. The library of Thornwood Manor held the accumulated knowledge of generations, its walls lined with leather-bound volumes from floor to ceiling. The scent of aged paper and leather bindings mingled with the faint aroma of brandy and pipe tobacco. A gentleman's sanctuary preserved through time. Mr. Harrington was found here, Dr. Reynolds indicated, gesturing toward a burgundy leather armchair, positioned near the unlit fireplace. The housemaid discovered him when she came to light the morning fire. He appeared to be sleeping, but when she addressed him, the doctor cleared his throat. Well, it was immediately apparent he had passed. Poirot moved to the chair, his eyes scanning the surrounding area with methodical precision. He was alone, you believe? Undoubtedly, Reynolds replied. The door was locked from the inside. Winters had to fetch the spare key. And what was Monsieur Harrington doing in the library at such an hour? Poirot inquired, bending to examine the small side table next to the armchair. Working late, presumably. He often did when staying at Thornwood. Sir Richard had given him use of the library to review documents. Hastings, who had joined them after excusing himself from the remaining dinner guests, watched Poirot carefully navigate the room, occasionally stopping to examine seemingly insignificant details. Dash not or Hutuan, arrangement of papers on the desk, the position of bookends, the contents of the crystal decanter on the sideboard. The papers Monsieur Harrington was reviewing, they have been collected, yes? Poirot asked, straightening the precisely clipped points of his moustache. Dr. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. Inspector Graves secured what documents remained, though I understand many were missing. Missing? Poirot's eyebrows rose fractionally. How interesting. And the key to the library, it was found where? In the lock, on the inside of the door. Poirot made a small noise of consideration before moving to examine the bookshelves. An impressive collection. The Blackwoods are a family of readers, it seems. Frederick was, Dr. Reynolds conceded. Sir Richard prefers more active pursuits, hunting, riding. Gerald takes after him in that regard. Poirot paused before a shelf of leather-bound journals. And these? Family records, perhaps? I wouldn't. No, Reynolds replied stiffly. The Blackwood family affairs are not my concern beyond their medical care. And yet, Poirot observed mildly, you were present at dinner tonight, despite 2 deaths having occurred. You are more than merely the family physician, no? A slight flush crept up the doctor's neck. I've known the Blackwoods for 30 years. Sir Richard requested I stay, given the circumstances. Now, if you've satisfied your curiosity. One moment more, if you please, Poirot said, approaching the massive oak desk that dominated one end of the library. This was where Monsieur Harrington worked. Yes. His briefcase was found there, though apparently some papers were scattered. Poirot's gloved finger traced a faint impression in the leather desktop. Haste, he murmured, or perhaps alarm. His eyes fell on a small waste-paper basket beside the desk, where several crumpled papers lay. With your permission, Doctor. Before Reynolds could protest, Poirot had retrieved one of the crumpled sheets and carefully smoothed it out. Ha, he said softly, most illuminating. What is it? Hastings asked, moving closer. A partial draft of a letter, Poirot replied, his eyes scanning the page. In Monsieur Harrington's hand, I presume, addressed to Sir Richard, but never completed. He read aloud, Sir Richard, upon review of the amended will, I must express grave concerns about the implications of your brother's changes. The revelation regarding... Poirot looked up. It ends there. Likely a professional disagreement, Dr. Reynolds said dismissively. Frederick's decision to leave Evelyn a controlling interest in the shipping company was controversial. Indeed, Poirot's expression remained neutral. A decision that might displease Sir Richard, perhaps. That's quite enough speculation, Reynolds said firmly. Harrington had a heart condition, just like Frederick. The strain of the contentious will likely contributed to his attack. 2 heart attacks, so conveniently timed, Poirot mused, pocketing the crumpled paper despite Reynolds' frown of disapproval. Tell me, Doctor, as a medical man, what are your thoughts on digitalis? The question, seemingly random, caused Reynolds to stiffen visibly. Digitalis. It's extracted from foxglove, used to treat heart conditions, strengthen cardiac contractions. Why do you ask? Professional curiosity, Poirot replied lightly. Is it not true that in excessive doses, digitalis can cause a fatal heart attack that might appear unnatural? Theoretically, yes, Reynolds conceded reluctantly, but any competent post-mortem would detect it. If one were looking for it, Poirot countered. Was such a specific test performed on Monsieur Frederick or Monsieur Harrington? They'd shit. Doctor's lips pressed into a thin line. There was no reason to suspect foul play. A soft knock at the library door interrupted their conversation. Winters entered, his dignified bearing at odds with the obvious distress in his eyes. Forgive the intrusion, sir. He addressed Poirot. Miss Evelyn asked me to inform you that she would like to speak with you privately. She awaits in the conservatory. Thank you, Winters, Poirot replied. I shall join her momentarily. As the butler departed, Poirot turned once more to survey the library. One final question, if you would be so kind, Dr. Reynolds. The night Frederick Blackwood died, you were summoned here to Thornwood. Yes, around 2 in the morning. Sir Richard's call woke me. By the time I arrived, Frederick was already gone. And you had been treating him with digitalis for his heart condition? Reynolds hesitated. Yes, a standard dosage. His heart had been weakening for years. Nothing unusual about it. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Merci, Doctor. You have been most informative. He gestured for Hastings to follow him from the room. Once in the corridor and out of earshot, Hastings leaned in. You suspect poisoning, Poirot? Digitalis overdose disguised as natural heart failure? Perhaps, mon ami, Poirot replied softly. But more importantly, observe how our good doctor reacted to the suggestion. He knows something he is not telling. They made their way through the dimly lit corridors toward the conservatory, passing beneath the watchful eyes of Blackwood ancestors. As they walked, a floorboard creaked behind them, but when Hastings turned, the hallway appeared empty. Someone is following us, he whispered. Naturellement, Poirot replied without turning. In a house where 2 men have died, secrets walk the corridors alongside their keepers. The conservatory stood at the east end of the manor, a cathedral of glass and wrought iron silhouetted against the night sky. Inside, exotic plants created intimate spaces of shadow and greenery. Evelyn Blackwood sat on a stone bench beside a small fountain, the gentle splash of water nearly masking the sound of their approach. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, rising quickly. "Thank you for coming. There's something I need to show you." She glanced nervously over her shoulder. "Something I found in my uncle's personal effects after his death. I believe it may explain everything." From the pocket of her dress, she withdrew a small key. "This opens a safety deposit box at the London Mercantile Bank. Inside is a document Uncle Frederick entrusted to me the day before he died. He made me promise not to speak of it until after the will was read." Her hand trembled as she pressed the key into Poirot's palm. "But now Harrington is dead, the will is missing, and I fear I may be next." "Why do you say this, mademoiselle?" Poirot asked gently. "Because," Evelyn whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "This morning, before Mr. Harrington was found, someone left this on my pillow." She reached again into her pocket and withdrew a single white glove, the match to the one found in the entrance hall. "My mother's other glove," she said, her voice breaking, "with this inside." From within the glove, she produced a yellowed newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Blackwood heiress plunges to death. Accident or something more sinister." Chapter 5. Midnight Revelations. Poirot examined the newspaper clipping under the gentle illumination of the conservatory lamps. The article, dated 8 years prior, contained few details beyond those Evelyn had already shared. Victoria Blackwood had fallen from the West Tower in what was ruled an accident. The piece hinted at unanswered questions and family tensions, but offered no substantive revelations. "Who would send you this, mademoiselle?" Poirot asked, studying Evelyn's pale face. "Someone who knows the truth about Mother's death," she whispered. "Someone afraid that Uncle Frederick discovered something worth killing for." Hastings shifted uncomfortably. "But why wait 8 years? Why not reveal the truth sooner?" "Because," Poirot interjected softly, "perhaps it is only now that the truth threatens to emerge. Tell me, Mademoiselle Evelyn, this document in the safety deposit box, did your uncle share its contents with you?" She shook her head. "He only said it was insurance, and that I should retrieve it if anything happened to him. He seemed afraid." A sudden gust of wind rattled the conservatory glass, causing Evelyn to start. Beyond the windows, clouds scudded across the face of the moon, casting shifting shadows through the foliage. "You must leave for London first thing tomorrow," she continued urgently. "Get the document before—" The conservatory door opened with a creak, silencing her. Diana stood framed in the doorway, her platinum hair gleaming in the moonlight. "A clandestine meeting in the conservatory," she drawled, sauntering toward them. "How deliciously Gothic. Don't stop on my account." "This is a private conversation," Evelyn said stiffly. "Nothing stays private at Thornwood," Diana replied, trailing her fingers along the large fern. "These walls have witnessed every Blackwood sin for centuries." She turned to Poirot with an arch smile. "Made any progress, detective? Discovered which of us harbors murderous intent?" "Mademoiselle Diana," Poirot acknowledged with a slight bow. "I understand you were close to Monsieur Frederick." "Uncle Frederick was the only one who understood me," Diana said, her flippant tone faltering momentarily. "The rest of the family merely tolerates my presence because of my trust fund. Yet he changed his will just before his death," Poirot observed, Might that have affected your inheritance? Something hard flashed in Diana's violet eyes before she laughed. A brittle sound that didn't reach those eyes. Trying to establish motive, Monsieur Poirot. How conventional. But yes, I stood to inherit a tidy sum from dear Uncle Frederick. Whether that remains true under his new will, we may never know. Now that Harrington has so inconveniently expired with the document, nowhere to be found. Diana, please, Evelyn implored. 2 men are dead. Men die every day, darling. Diana replied coldly, particularly men who pry into the past. Her gaze flicked to the white glove Evelyn had hastily tucked back into her pocket. Playing with ghosts, Evie. Dangerous game. Before Evelyn could respond, the conservatory door opened again to admit Gerald. His dinner jacket discarded, his tie loosened. Quite the gathering, he remarked, leaning against a marble pillar. Father's looking for you, Diana. Something about borrowing his car without permission. Diana rolled her eyes. Richard needs to remember I'm not one of his employees to be summoned at will. I'll speak with him when I'm ready. Gerald's gaze sharpened. What are you all discussing so secretly? Your mother's death, Diana replied bluntly, ignoring Evelyn's gasp of dismay. The accident that wasn't an accident. Isn't that right, Evie? Gerald's face drained of color. What nonsense are you speaking now? Evelyn rose, her composure cracking. Why did you have to come here, Diana? Everything was peaceful before you arrived after Uncle Frederick's death. Peaceful? Diana laughed again, harsher this time. Is that what we're calling willful blindness these days? This family has been rotting from the inside for years. Uncle Frederick was the only one brave enough to finally face it. She turned to Gerald. Ask your sister what she's been hiding. Ask her what Frederick gave her before he died. Gerald's gaze swung to his sister. Evie? In the tense silence that followed, Poirot cleared his throat. Perhaps, Mademoiselle Diana, you might enlighten us. You seem to possess knowledge beyond what you have shared. Diana's smile turned enigmatic. Uncle Frederick confided in me too, you know. He wasn't as secretive as he thought. She moved closer to Poirot, lowering her voice theatrically. The night before he died, I overheard him on the telephone. He said, I have proof now. After all these years, Victoria will have justice. Evelyn gave a small cry, one hand flying to her mouth. Is that true? Gerald demanded, advancing on Diana. If you're making this up. Why would I? Diana challenged. What could I possibly gain by inventing such a story? Considerable drama, Gerald retorted, which you've always thrived on. Irritate, eyes narrowed. Careful, Gerald. We all have secrets we'd prefer to keep buried. The veiled threat hung in the air until Poirot spoke again, his voice deliberately calm. When did Monsieur Frederick make this call, mademoiselle? Around midnight, Diana replied. I was returning from a late swim in the lake. In October. Gerald scoffed. In the middle of the night? I find cold water invigorating, Diana replied with a defiant tilt of her chin. Besides, we all have our nocturnal habits, don't we, Gerald? How is Miss Harlow these days? Gerald's face darkened dangerously. You little... That's enough, Evelyn interrupted, placing herself between them. This is precisely what someone wants, to turn us against each other. Poirot watched the exchange with attentive eyes, noting the shifting alliances and hostilities. Mademoiselle Diana, did Frederick mention to whom this proof would be delivered? Diana's expression became guarded. No, only that once it was in the right hands, everything would change. A bell chimed somewhere in the house, marking the late hour. "I believe it is time we all retired," Poirot suggested smoothly. "The morning may bring clearer perspectives." They dispersed into the shadowy corridors of Thornwood Manor. Hastings fell into step beside Poirot. "What do you make of all that?" "Diana seems to delight in stirring trouble." "Perhaps," Poirot replied thoughtfully. "Or perhaps she employs provocation as a shield. Did you observe how quickly she deflected attention when pressed about her midnight swim? Most curious." Reaching their rooms, Poirot paused before entering. "Lock your door tonight, mon ami. And perhaps," he added with a meaningful glance, "place a chair beneath the handle. You think we're in danger?" Hastings asked, lowering his voice. "Someone in this house has killed twice to protect a secret." Poirot replied quietly, "Now that we pursue that same secret." He left the implication hanging. Hours later, Hastings woke with a start. The luminous dial of his bedside clock showed 2:17 a.m. Something had disturbed his sleep. A sound, perhaps, or there it was again, a soft scraping at his door, followed by the gentle testing of the handle. Hastings held his breath, watching as the handle turned slowly, the door pressing against the chair he had wedged beneath it, as Poirot suggested. After a moment, the pressure ceased. Soft footsteps retreated down the corridor. Hastings waited until he was certain the prowler had gone, before slipping from his bed and crossing to the adjoining door that connected his room to Poirot's. He knocked softly. "Entrez," came the immediate response, suggesting Poirot had not been asleep. Hastings found his friend fully dressed, seated in an armchair with a small leather-bound book open on his lap. "Someone tried my door," Hastings said without preamble. "We?" Poirot nodded, unsurprised. "Mine as well. Our presence has accelerated matters." "What are you reading?" Hastings asked, noticing the aged appearance of the book. "Victoria Blackwood's diary," Poirot replied, holding it up, placed rather conspicuously upon my pillow while we were in the conservatory. "Good Lord, by whom?" "That," Poirot said, turning a page with careful fingers, "is yet another question. But the answers, mon ami, the answers are beginning to assemble themselves, and they tell a story far darker than even Mademoiselle Evelyn suspects." He closed the diary with a decisive snap. "Tomorrow, we must travel to London. The safety deposit box cannot wait. But tonight—" He gestured toward the window, where a light moved across the grounds below. "Tonight it seems Thornwood Manor has yet more secrets to reveal." Chapter 6. The London Revelation. Morning arrived at Thornwood Manor with a thin grey light that did little to dispel the shadows lingering in its corridors. Poirot and Hastings descended to breakfast early, finding the dining room occupied only by Winters, who arranged silver covers over chafing dishes with meticulous precision. "Good morning, Winters," Poirot greeted. "We shall require transportation to the railway station directly after breakfast. A matter of some urgency." "I shall inform Parker, sir," the butler replied with practiced neutrality, "though I believe Sir Richard was expecting you to depart later today." "A telegram requires my presence in London," Poirot replied smoothly. "Most inconvenient, but unavoidable." They ate quickly and in relative silence. Poirot had placed Victoria's diary carefully in his inner pocket. Its secrets, what he had gleaned from them at least, kept to himself for now. As they finished, Gerald Blackwood appeared in the doorway, looking remarkably fresh for a man who had consumed considerable brandy the night before. "Off somewhere?" he inquired, helping himself to coffee. "London calls," Poirot replied. "A brief professional matter." Gerald's eyes narrowed slightly. "I'm headed to the city myself. Company business can't wait, even for deaths in the family. Perhaps we might share the car." Poirot and Hastings exchanged a glance. "Most kind," Poirot said after a moment's consideration, "though we should not wish to inconvenience you." "Not at all," Gerald insisted with forced joviality. "I've been meaning to pick your brain about this whole affair. Father may dismiss Evie's concerns, but I'm not so certain." The journey to the station proceeded under a veneer of polite conversation. Gerald proved adept at discussing everything, except what clearly preoccupied them all: the deaths at Thornwood and the strange events surrounding them. Only as they boarded the London-bound train did he broach the subject directly. "This business with Mother's gloves," he said abruptly, as they settled into a first-class compartment. "Disturbing, to say the least." "Indeed," Poirot agreed. "What memories do you retain of your mother's passing, Monsieur Blackwood?" A shadow crossed Gerald's handsome features. "I was at university. Came home for the funeral. Father was destroyed, refused to speak of it. Uncle Frederick handled everything. And the circumstances of her fall." Gerald shifted uncomfortably. "Supposedly, she was walking along the West Tower parapet, something she often did in the evenings. Slipped in the rain. Simple tragic accident. Yet the newspaper clipping suggests otherwise," Poirot observed. "For local gossip," Gerald dismissed, though his eyes betrayed uncertainty. "Small communities thrive on scandal. The police investigation was thorough." "Conducted by whom?" "Inspector Graves, actually. He was a sergeant then." Poirot's eyebrows rose, fractionally. "The same Inspector Graves who now investigates the deaths of your uncle and Monsieur Harrington. How convenient." Gerald's jaw tightened. "Implying what, exactly?" "Merely an observation," Poirot replied mildly. "It creates an interesting continuity." The remainder of the journey passed in tense silence. As the train pulled into London, Gerald checked his pocket watch. "I have a meeting at the Blackwood shipping offices at 11. Where shall I meet you for the return journey?" "Most kind but unnecessary," Poirot demurred. "Our business may extend into the evening. We shall make our own arrangements." Gerald hesitated, clearly unsatisfied, but ultimately nodded. "As you wish. Should you change your mind, the offices are on Threadneedle Street." They parted at Thornwood station, Gerald hailing a cab with a backward glance that betrayed his curiosity. "He's wondering where we're headed," Hastings remarked as they watched his taxi disappear into London's busy streets. "And whether we shall discover what his uncle concealed," Poirot agreed, hailing another cab. "To the London Mercantile Bank, if you please," he instructed the driver. The bank occupied an imposing Portland stone building in the heart of the financial district. Inside, Poirot presented Evelyn's key and letter of authorization to a discreet manager who led them to a private room where the safety deposit box awaited. "Will there be anything else, sir?" the manager inquired. "Privacy, if you would. Be so kind," Poirot replied with a slight bow. Once alone, Poirot inserted the key into the lock with ceremonial deliberation. The box opened to reveal a single sealed envelope and a small leather case. Poirot withdrew the envelope first, breaking the seal with careful fingers. "What is it?" Hastings asked, unable to contain his curiosity, as Poirot scanned the contents. "A sworn affidavit," Poirot replied, his voice uncharacteristically grave. "Signed by Frederick Blackwood 3 days before his death, and witnessed by Harrington." He passed the document to Hastings, whose eyes widened as he read. Good Lord, Frederick was accusing his own brother of... Precisely. Poirot nodded, turning his attention to the leather case. Inside lay a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. "Ah," he murmured, "the physical evidence to support the accusation." Hastings examined the locket. "It looks ordinary enough." "Open it, mon ami." Inside the locket were 2 small compartments. One held a miniature photograph of Victoria Blackwood, a striking woman with Evelyn's auburn hair and determined expression. The other contained what appeared to be several crystals of a white substance. "What is it?" Hastings asked. "If Frederick's affidavit is correct," Poirot replied, "digitalis, preserved from 8 years ago, the same substance that may have claimed Frederick and Harrington." "You mean Victoria was poisoned?" "Yes. Her disorientation would have led to her fall. A perfect murder disguised as a tragic accident. And Frederick discovered this how? According to his statement, Victoria had suspected her husband was attempting to poison her." Poirot explained, indicating the document. "She began secretly preserving samples of her food and drink. The night of her death, she confided her fears to Frederick, giving him this locket for safekeeping. Before he could act, she was dead." Why didn't Frederick go to the police immediately? He had no proof beyond the locket, and testing methods 8 years ago were less advanced. By his own admission, he doubted himself, could not believe his brother capable of such an act. Poirot's face was solemn. Until recently, when Sir Richard's behavior apparently confirmed his worst suspicions, and now both Frederick and the solicitor who witnessed this statement are dead, Hastings concluded grimly. "Of heart failure," Poirot added significantly. "The signature of digitalis poisoning." As they secured the evidence and prepared to leave, Hastings frowned. "There's something I don't understand. If Sir Richard is the murderer, why would Victoria's gloves suddenly appear now? Surely he wouldn't draw attention to her death." "A most perceptive question," Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming with approval, and one that suggests our understanding remains incomplete. They emerged from the bank into the bustling London street, evidence secured in Poirot's inside pocket. Neither noticed the figure watching from across the road, a figure that now moved purposefully toward a telephone box. "What now?" Hastings asked as they hailed a taxi. "Now, mon ami, we set a trap," Poirot replied. "We return to Thornwood Manor with our discovery, but not before making one additional stop." He gave the driver an address in Fleet Street. "A newspaper office?" Hastings questioned as they pulled away. "Indeed. If there is one thing a murderer cannot resist, it is the belief that their opponent has made a fatal error." Poirot's expression was calm but determined. "By this evening, all of London will know that Hercule Poirot has uncovered evidence linking Sir Richard Blackwood to 3 murders. The killer will be forced to act, and in doing so, reveal themselves. You're using yourself as bait, Hastings realized with alarm. That's incredibly dangerous, Poirot. Perhaps, the detective conceded, but consider this, my friend. I have studied Victoria's diary most carefully, and there is a detail, one small detail, that troubles me greatly. He tapped the affidavit in his pocket. Frederick's account is most thorough, most logical, except for one critical omission. Which is? Poirot's eyes met Hastings with uncharacteristic gravity. The signature of the second witness to his affidavit. A name carefully removed from the document. Someone else knows the truth, Hastings. Someone who may be our ally, or our most dangerous adversary. As their taxi navigated London's crowded streets, the afternoon shadows lengthened, stretching like dark fingers towards the evening that would bring them back to Thornwood Manor and its web of deadly secrets. Chapter 7. Return to Thornwood. The evening edition of the London Chronicle carried a small but prominent notice. Famous detective uncovers evidence in Blackwood case. Revelations expected. It was vague enough to intrigue the public, yet specific enough to alarm anyone with reason to fear the truth. Dusk was falling as Poirot and Hastings arrived back at Thornwood Manor. The imposing silhouette of the house stood dark against the twilight sky, its windows glowing with warm light that belied the tensions within. "And are you quite certain about this strategy?" Hastings murmured as their taxi crunched up the gravel drive. "Whoever killed Frederick and Harrington won't hesitate to make you their third victim." "Précisément," Poirot agreed, adjusting his bow tie with fastidious precision. "But the murderer will act in haste, and in haste there is always error. Besides," he patted his pocket where the affidavit and locket rested, "we have taken certain precautions. Before leaving London, Poirot had visited Scotland Yard, leaving copies of Frederick's statement and photographs of the locket with a senior inspector, along with instructions to be opened if anything should happen to either of them. He had also sent a sealed envelope to his solicitor containing his deductions thus far." Parker greeted them at the entrance, his professional demeanor betraying no curiosity about their London excursion. "Sir Richard requests your presence in the drawing-room before dinner, sir," he informed Poirot. "The family has gathered." The tension in the drawing-room was palpable as they entered. Sir Richard stood by the fireplace, tumbler of whiskey in hand, his expression thunderous. Evelyn perched nervously on a chaise longue, while Gerald lounged in an armchair with affected nonchalance. Diana, draped elegantly across a brocade sofa, bore a satisfied smirk that suggested she was thoroughly enjoying the family's discomfort. Only Miss Harlow seemed unaffected, sitting primly in the corner with a leather-bound ledger open before her. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot." Sir Richard's voice carried the brittle control of a man suppressing considerable rage. "Perhaps you might explain this." He thrust a copy of the London Chronicle toward the detective. Poirot accepted the newspaper with a slight bow. "It appears the press has taken an interest in recent events at Thornwood." "An interest you have clearly encouraged." Sir Richard's composure cracked. "I welcomed you into my home on my daughter's insistence. And this is how you repay my hospitality, by dragging the Blackwood name through the mud." "Father, please," Evelyn interjected. "Monsieur Poirot is trying to help us." "Help us?" Sir Richard scoffed. By insinuating murder where there is none. By disappearing to London on mysterious errands. Assure you, Sir Richard, Poirot replied calmly, that my only desire is to arrive at the truth. If that truth exonerates your family, so much the better. There's nothing to exonerate. Sir Richard slammed his glass down, amber liquid sloshing over the rim. My brother died of a heart condition. Harrington likewise. These insinuations about my wife's accident are intolerable. And yet, Poirot observed mildly, someone has gone to considerable lengths to revive interest in that accident. The gloves, the newspaper clipping, curious actions if there is nothing to hide. Gerald straightened in his chair. What exactly did you discover in London, Poirot? All in good time, monsieur. Poirot demurred. The pieces of this puzzle are still arranging themselves. Diana's laugh cut through the tension like a knife. Oh, this is delicious. The great detective has something up his sleeve. Tell me, Monsieur Poirot, which of us features in your little exposé? Richard, with his empire to protect. Gerald, with his gambling debts. Or perhaps it's Evie, the dutiful daughter with a mind of her own. Diana, that's enough. Gerald snapped. Why? Diana challenged, violet eyes glittering dangerously. Aren't you curious what Uncle Frederick left in that safety deposit box? What was so important he gave Evie the key just before he died? Sir Richard's head swiveled toward his daughter. Safety deposit box. What is she talking about, Evelyn? Evelyn's face paled. I don't know what she means. Oh, come now, Diana persisted, clearly relishing her role as provocateur. We all have our secrets, but yours is currently burning a hole in Monsieur Poirot's pocket, isn't it, detective? All eyes turned to Poirot, who remained impassive. Mademoiselle Diana seems remarkably well informed about matters not directly concerning her. This family's affairs have always concerned me, Diana retorted, especially when they involve my inheritance. Your inheritance was never in jeopardy. Sir Richard dismissed. Wasn't it? Diana challenged. Uncle Frederick made it quite clear his new will would redistribute the family assets more equitably. And now, conveniently, both he and his solicitor are dead, and the will is missing. The dinner gong sounded, its resonant tone temporarily halting the increasingly heated exchange. This discussion is over, Sir Richard declared coldly. We will dine as civilized people, and tomorrow, Monsieur Poirot will leave Thornwood as agreed. Dinner was a tense affair. Dr. Reynolds had sent his apologies, citing an emergency in the village. Inspector Graves had returned to London, apparently satisfied that Harrington's death required no further investigation. The conversation remained stilted, confined to bland observations about the weather and local affairs. As the dessert was served, a trifle that no one seemed inclined to eat, Winters approached Poirot discreetly. A telephone call for you, sir, from London. Excusing himself, Poirot followed the butler to the study where the telephone waited. Poirot speaking, he said, conscious of Winters lingering near the partially open door. Inspector Japp here, came the familiar voice of his old friend from Scotland Yard. We've examined those samples you left. The lab confirms it's digitalis, and in a significant concentration, more than enough to be fatal. As I suspected, Poirot replied, and the comparison matches the previous cases. Same method, same substance. You were right, old chap. 3 murders, not accidents or natural causes. We're preparing warrants now. Excellent. I believe I shall be able to provide the final piece this evening. Be careful, Poirot, Japp warned. Whoever you're dealing with is desperate and dangerous. Fear not, mon ami. Precautions have been taken. Returning to the dining room, Poirot found the atmosphere had grown even more frigid in his absence. Sir Richard's face was rigid with barely contained fury, while Evelyn appeared on the verge of tears. Only Miss Harlow maintained her usual composure, methodically consuming her trifle, as if oblivious to the emotional currents swirling around her. I believe, Poirot announced, that the time has come for certain truths to be acknowledged. Not at my dinner table, Sir Richard growled. Perhaps then, Poirot suggested, the library would be more appropriate. I have made a discovery that concerns each person present. Sir Richard seemed about to refuse when Gerald intervened. For God's sake, Father, let's hear what he has to say. This cloud of suspicion helps no one. After a tense moment, Sir Richard gave a curt nod. Very well, the library, 10 minutes. As they dispersed, Hastings drew close to Poirot. Was that Japp? What did he say? The evidence confirms our theory, Poirot replied softly. Digitalis poisoning in all 3 cases. Then Sir Richard is our man. Poirot's expression remained enigmatic. Perhaps. But recall Victoria's diary, Hastings. There was a curious entry the week before her death. She wrote of having tea with the only person I can truly trust. Not her husband, not her brother-in-law. Someone else entirely. The second witness to Frederick's affidavit? I believe so. Poirot's eyes followed Miss Harlow as she exited the dining room with perfect posture. Someone who has been present throughout this affair, observing, waiting. Someone who recognized Victoria's glove immediately, yet said nothing. Hastings followed his gaze. Miss Harlow, but she's just a secretary. Is she? Poirot mused. Or is she perhaps something more? Tonight, Hastings, masks will fall. And when they do, we must be prepared for what lies beneath them. As they walked toward the library, Hastings couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The shadowy corridors of Thornwood Manor, the portraits of Blackwood ancestors, seemed to follow their progress with painted eyes that held generations of secrets. Secrets that would soon be exposed in a revelation that would shake the ancient house to its very foundations. Chapter 8. The Library Assembly. The library of Thornwood Manor had witnessed countless family discussions, negotiations, and arguments throughout its long history. Tonight, it would witness a revelation of murder. Poirot stood before the fireplace, the flames casting dramatic shadows across his features. Sir Richard occupied his usual armchair with regal displeasure, while Gerald leaned against a bookshelf, affecting disinterest but betraying tension in the tightness of his jaw. Diana lounged on the leather Chesterfield, a crystal tumbler of brandy balanced between elegant fingers. Evelyn perched nervously on a straight-backed chair, her hands tightly clasped in her lap. Miss Harlow sat slightly apart from the family, her notebook open as if this were merely another business meeting. At Poirot's request, Winters and Parker were also present, standing discreetly near the door. The butler's impassive face revealed nothing, while the chauffeur shifted uncomfortably, clearly unused to being included in family gatherings. "I must protest at this theatrical assembly," Sir Richard began, but Poirot raised a hand. "Indulge me, Sir Richard. What I have to say concerns everyone in this room." Poirot's gaze travelled slowly from face to face. 3 deaths have occurred. Madame Victoria Blackwood 8 years ago, Monsieur Frederick Blackwood 3 weeks past, and Monsieur Harrington just days ago. 3 deaths that appear unconnected, and yet, I submit to you, are links in the same chain. "My wife's death was an accident," Sir Richard insisted, knuckles whitening around his walking stick. "A convenient conclusion," Poirot acknowledged. But Frederick Blackwood came to believe otherwise. In the weeks before his own death, he assembled evidence suggesting that Victoria Blackwood was poisoned with digitalis, a substance that causes disorientation before death. Her fall was no accident, but the final step in a calculated murder. Diana leaned forward, violet eyes gleaming with interest. "Go on, detective. Who poisoned dear Aunt Victoria?" "Frederick believed the culprit to be his own brother," Poirot stated, watching Sir Richard's face carefully. He prepared an affidavit accusing Sir Richard of poisoning his wife, supported by physical evidence, a locket containing traces of digitalis that Victoria had secretly collected, suspecting she was being poisoned. Sir Richard surged to his feet. "This is outrageous slander of the worst kind." "Father, please," Evelyn implored, "let him finish." "Indeed," Poirot continued calmly, "because there is more to this story than Frederick's accusation. You see, Frederick himself died of apparent heart failure, a condition that can be induced by digitalis poisoning. And then Monsieur Harrington, who witnessed Frederick's affidavit, also died in precisely the same manner. You're suggesting the same person killed all 3? Gerald asked, his affected nonchalance slipping. "Exactement. Someone who had motive to silence Victoria, then Frederick when he discovered the truth, and finally Harrington, who could verify Frederick's accusations." Poirot's finger tapped against his lips thoughtfully. "But here we encounter our first paradox. If Sir Richard poisoned his wife, why would he draw attention to her death now? By placing her gloves where they would certainly be discovered. Why resurrect a crime long considered closed?" Sir Richard sank back into his chair, expression caught between outrage and confusion. "The answer," Poirot continued, "lies in understanding not one murder plot, but 2. The first concluded 8 years ago with Victoria's death. The second began when Frederick discovered the truth, and has not yet reached its conclusion." Miss Harlow's pen moved steadily across her notebook, documenting every word. "This second plot," Poirot explained, "involved not only eliminating Frederick and Harrington, but also manipulating our understanding of events by introducing the gloves and newspaper clipping, creating deliberate parallels to suggest Sir Richard as the culprit." "Are you saying my father is innocent?" Evelyn asked, hope flaring briefly in her eyes. "I am saying," Poirot replied carefully, "that the evidence against him has been arranged too neatly. Consider, Frederick's affidavit named Sir Richard as Victoria's murderer, yet someone removed the name of the second witness to that document. Why? Perhaps because that witness knew something that would contradict Frederick's conclusion." Poirot withdrew Victoria's diary from his pocket. "This was placed on my pillow by someone wishing me to read it. Most illuminating. particularly the entries from the week before Victoria's death. She writes of taking tea with the only person I can truly trust. Not her husband, not her brother-in-law. He paused significantly. She also mentions D repeatedly. Someone who understood her fears, who had access to the household, who might verify her suspicions. Could this be the missing witness to Frederick's affidavit? Diana straightened slightly, her expression guarded. The diary also reveals that Victoria suspected not only her husband, but others in the household of strange behavior. She writes of missing items, rearranged belongings, and the sensation of being watched. Most significantly, she notes that her digitalis prescription, intended to treat a minor heart arrhythmia, seemed to produce unusually severe effects. My wife was becoming paranoid toward the end, Sir Richard said quietly, his earlier bluster fading. The doctor had mentioned it might be a side effect of her medication, or perhaps, Poirot suggested, her medication was being tampered with. Her dosage increased to dangerous levels, not by her husband, but by someone else entirely. A log shifted in the fireplace, sending sparks fluttering upward. In the momentary distraction, Poirot observed Miss Harlow closing her notebook with a decisive snap. "This speculation serves no purpose," she said, her voice surprisingly authoritative, for one supposedly merely employed by the family. "These accusations against Sir Richard are groundless." "Are they?" Poirot challenged gently. "Or are they precisely what someone wanted us to believe? Someone who knew the household intimately, who had access to Victoria's belongings, who could tamper with Frederick's affidavit, who could move freely throughout Thornwood without arousing suspicion." His gaze settled on Miss Harlow, whose calm demeanor remained unchanged. "Someone who has been present in this house for how long, mademoiselle? 10 years, predating even Victoria's death." 12 years, she corrected primly. "Sir Richard values loyalty and competence." "Indeed," Poirot murmured. "And what of your relationship with Gerald Blackwood? Diana alluded to it last night." Gerald stiffened. "That's completely inappropriate." "Monsieur Poirot," Miss Harlow interrupted, her voice like ice. "Whatever relationship exists between myself and any member of this family is irrelevant to your wild accusations." "Is it?" Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Or might such a relationship provide motive for eliminating those who stood between Gerald and his inheritance?" A tense silence fell over the library. Even Diana appeared shocked by the directness of the accusation. "I think," Sir Richard said slowly, "that you have gone too far, Monsieur Poirot. Miss Harlow has served this family faithfully for years. To suggest she might be a murderer is beyond contempt." "Unless," came a new voice from the doorway. "He's right." All heads turned to see Dr. Reynolds standing there, his medical bag in hand, his face grave. "I apologize for my lateness," he said, moving into the room. "But I've just completed an analysis requested by Monsieur Poirot before he left for London." He placed a small vial on the desk, a sample from Frederick Blackwood's evening brandy, decanter, the one Miss Harlow was so insistent on cleaning the morning after his death. Despite the household being in mourning, it contains significant traces of digitalis. Miss Harlow's expression didn't change, but her hands, her perfectly steady, capable hands, tightened almost imperceptibly on her notebook. "How convenient," she said softly. "The faithful family doctor suddenly produces evidence that exonerates Sir Richard and implicates me. One might almost suspect collusion. One might, Poirot agreed, surprising everyone, if not for Victoria's own words. He opened the diary again, turning to a marked page. April 18th. Met with D today. She remains my only ally in this house of secrets. Together, perhaps we can expose the truth before it's too late. All eyes turned to Diana, whose usual composure flickered momentarily. D for Diana, Gerald suggested. Perhaps, Poirot acknowledged. Or perhaps... His gaze shifted meaningfully back to Miss Harlow. Dorothy, Sir Richard said suddenly, his voice barely audible. Miss Harlow's given name is Dorothy. Chapter 9. The First Truth. The library fell silent as Sir Richard's words hung in the air. Miss Harlow, Dorothy, remained perfectly still, her face a masterpiece of composure despite the sudden shift in attention. Yes, she acknowledged after a moment, my given name is Dorothy. A common enough name that I prefer not to use professionally. Dorothy Harlow, Poirot mused, the confidant of Victoria Blackwood in her final days. The second witness to Frederick's, a fit of it, your signature carefully removed from the document. You cannot prove that, Miss Harlow replied evenly. Can I not? Poirot countered. The affidavit shows clear signs of tampering, precisely where a second witness signature would appear. And then there is this. From his pocket, he withdrew the gold locket found in the safety deposit box. Victoria's final evidence, entrusted not to Frederick as he believed, but to you. He discovered it among your possessions, didn't he? Recognized it as his sister-in-law's, and confronted you. Miss Harlow's eyes flickered briefly to the locket, before returning to Poirot's face. You weave an interesting tale, Monsieur Poirot. But it remains just that, a tale. Dorothy, Sir Richard's voice was hollow with disbelief. Is this true? Did Victoria confide in you? Before she could answer, Gerald interrupted. This is absurd. Dorothy has been loyal to this family, to you, father, for years. Why would she harm anyone, least of all Mother? For you, perhaps, Diana suggested, swirling her brandy. A secretary in love with the heir, eliminating obstacles to his inheritance. Rather tawdry, but effective. Silence, Sir Richard commanded. I will hear the truth from Miss Harlow herself. All eyes turned to the secretary, whose perfect posture had not wavered. Only the slightest whitening of her knuckles betrayed any tension. Very well, she said finally. It's true that Lady Blackwood confided in me. She believed she was being poisoned and asked for my help in collecting evidence. Her gaze shifted to Sir Richard. She suspected you, sir. Sir Richard's face drained of colour. Victoria thought I was trying to kill her. But why would I? I loved her more than life itself. And yet, Miss Harlow continued coldly. She was dying by increments. Her heart medication was being systematically increased beyond therapeutic levels. Someone with access to her personal items was ensuring she received a lethal dose. If not father, then who? Evelyn demanded. Miss Harlow's expression remained impassive. I had my suspicions, but no proof. When Lady Blackwood died, the evidence she had gathered seemed insufficient to pursue the matter. I kept the locket, hoping someday to prove the truth. Until Frederick discovered it, Poirot interjected. He found the locket among your belongings and confronted you. But instead of revealing your suspicions, You allowed him to believe his brother was guilty. Frederick was convinced Richard was responsible. Miss Harlow replied, he wouldn't consider alternatives. So you witnessed his affidavit, knowing it accused the wrong person. Hastings asked incredulously. I witnessed a document stating that Victoria Blackwood was murdered. Miss Harlow corrected. That much was true. The identity of her killer remained uncertain. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. And yet, when Frederick and Harrington died in the same manner, you said nothing, did nothing. Why? For the first time, Miss Harlow's composure faltered slightly. Fear, Monsieur Poirot. The killer had struck again after 8 years of silence. I had no proof, only suspicions, which you attempted to communicate by placing Victoria's diary on my pillow. Poirot suggested. A ghost of a smile touched Miss Harlow's lips. I believed you might interpret her entries more accurately than Frederick had. And the gloves? Hastings pressed. The newspaper clipping. Not my doing, she replied firmly. Those were calculated to draw attention to Victoria's death, to suggest parallels that might implicate Sir Richard. By the real killer, Poirot concluded, someone seeking to redirect suspicion away from themselves. Sir Richard rose shakily to his feet. I want to know who murdered my wife, he demanded, grief and rage warring in his voice. Who poisoned my brother and Harrington? Tell us, Poirot. The answer lies in understanding the motive. Poirot replied calmly. Victoria died 8 years ago. Frederick and Harrington died only after Frederick changed his will. What connection links these events beyond mere family relation? Money, Diana suggested bluntly. Inheritance, power over Blackwood shipping. Precisely, Poirot agreed. Victoria's death altered the family dynamic, but changed nothing regarding inheritance. The Blackwood fortune would pass from Sir Richard to Gerald in due course. But Frederick's new will threatened that succession. Fred's new will left controlling interest in the company to Evelyn. Gerald acknowledged, frowning. Father was furious when he learned of it. Yet your father had no need to murder for an inheritance he already controlled. Poirot pointed out. The only person truly threatened by the new will was the presumptive heir, who would now be superseded. All eyes turned to Gerald, who stiffened. You can't possibly think I... The evidence is substantial. Poirot interrupted. Your medical studies before you abandoned them for business would have given you knowledge of digitalis. Your frequent presence at Thornwood provided opportunity. Your financial difficulties supplied motive. Gerald's handsome face contorted with indignation. This is outrageous. I loved my mother. I respected Uncle Frederick. Did you? Poirot challenged quietly. Or were they obstacles to the fortune you so desperately need to cover your gambling debts? Debts that have mounted to dangerous levels, according to your uncle's private investigator. Private investigator? Gerald echoed, momentarily thrown. Another detail Frederick recorded in the documents secured in London. Poirot explained. He had become concerned about your activities, your associates. What he discovered prompted his decision to change his will. Gerald's face had gone very still, a mask of control that suddenly seemed chillingly familiar. The same perfect composure Miss Harlow had displayed throughout their conversation. Like mother, like son, Diana murmured, eyes widening with realization. The perfect poise in the face of accusation. I always wondered who Gerald took after. Certainly not impulsive Richard. Poirot's gaze moved between Gerald and Miss Harlow, whose eyes had not left each other's faces. Indeed, Poirot agreed quietly. The resemblance becomes quite pronounced when one knows to look for it. Chapter 10. The Second Truth. The silence in the library seemed to crystallize around them, heavy with implications not yet spoken aloud. Evelyn looked between Gerald and Miss Harlow, confusion giving way to dawning comprehension. "What are you suggesting, Monsieur Poirot?" Sir Richard demanded, though the tremor in his voice suggested he already feared the answer. "I suggest, Sir Richard," Poirot replied gently, "that your household has harbored a secret for many years. A secret concerning the true relationship between your son and your secretary." Gerald had recovered his composure, his handsome face arranged in an expression of affronted dignity. "This is beneath you, Poirot, insinuating some sordid affair to distract from your baseless accusations. Not an affair," Poirot corrected, "something far more significant. The diary of Victoria Blackwood contains an entry dated approximately 9 months before your birth. Monsieur Gerald, she writes of discovering her husband's indiscretion with a young woman newly employed in the household." Sir Richard's face had gone ashen. "Stop this," he whispered. "I forbid it." Victoria confronted her husband. Poirot continued inexorably, but chose to raise the child as her own rather than face scandal. A decision that perhaps she came to regret as the years passed, and tensions within the household mounted. Miss Harlow, Dorothy, sat unnaturally still, her perfect posture maintained despite the destruction of the careful facade she had maintained for decades. "You were never merely Sir Richard's secretary," Poirot addressed her directly. "You were the mother of his son, installed in the household to remain close to the child you had surrendered, a position that allowed you to observe everything, including Victoria's growing suspicions about her own declining health." "Dorothy." Gerald's voice had an unfamiliar quality, vulnerable, almost childlike. "Is this true?" For the first time, emotion cracked through Miss Harlow's composed exterior. "You were never supposed to know," she said softly. "That was the agreement. Victoria insisted. No scandal, no divided royalties. You would be raised as a Blackwood, with all the privileges that entailed." "How touching!" Diana interjected, her tone acid. The devoted mother watching her son from the shadows. "But that doesn't explain 3 murders. No?" Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Consider the dynamics at play. A biological mother, forced to observe her son from a distance. A legal mother growing increasingly suspicious and resentful. A father caught between them. And at the center, a young man discovering his true parentage." Gerald's composure shattered completely. "Stop it. I never knew, not until—" He broke off abruptly. "Not until Victoria confronted you directly," Poirot finished for him. "Perhaps after finding evidence of your gambling, your debts. She threatened to disinherit you, to reveal that you were not a true Blackwood by blood." "She had no right," Gerald whispered. "Everything I'd been raised to expect. My birthright, my future. She was going to take it all away because of one mistake." "So you ensured she could not," Poirot stated flatly. "Using knowledge from your medical studies, You began adding digitalis to her heart medication, gradually increasing the dosage until that fatal night when disorientation led to her fall from the tower. Evelyn made a small, wounded sound. Gerald, no. Tell me you didn't. The perfect crime, Poirot continued, until Frederick began to suspect, 8 years later. His investigation uncovered not only Victoria's murder, but also your true parentage and your dangerous financial situation. He changed his will to protect the company from your recklessness. And for that, he too had to die. You have no proof, Gerald said. But his voice lacked conviction. The evidence is substantial, Poirot countered. Digitalis in Frederick's brandy decanter. A decanter only family members would use. Harrington poisoned in the locked library. Locked by someone he would admit without suspicion. Your own medical knowledge. Your pressing debts. But most damning of all, Poirot withdrew a folded paper from his pocket. The second page of Frederick's affidavit, removed from the document in the safety deposit box, but preserved by Harrington in his personal files, recovered today from his London office. Gerald's eyes widened fractionally. This page names you, Gerald Blackwood, as the murderer of Victoria Blackwood, based on evidence Frederick had compiled. Evidence including testimony from someone who witnessed you tampering with Victoria's medication. Poirot turned to Miss Harlow. Your testimony, mademoiselle, you knew the truth 8 years ago, yet said nothing. Dorothy Harlow's facade finally crumbled completely. I couldn't, she whispered. He is my son. When I realized what he had done, what he was capable of, I couldn't bring myself to destroy him. Her haunted eyes met Gerald's. I removed the page identifying you from the affidavit, but I couldn't bring myself to destroy it. A mother's weakness. A weakness that enabled 2 more murders. Diana observed coldly. I had no part in those, Dorothy insisted. When Frederick and Harrington died, I knew Gerald must be responsible, but I had no proof. I placed Victoria's diary where Monsieur Poirot would find it, hoping he would uncover the truth I could not bring myself to reveal. Gerald's handsome face had transformed, coldness replacing his usual charm. How very maternal, he sneered, sacrificing 2 more lives to protect me, then arranging this little revelation when it suited you. Not to protect you, she corrected quietly. To protect myself from the knowledge that I had given birth to a monster of this family's creation. Gerald retorted, rising slowly. Raised on lies, taught that appearances matter above all, that Blackwood blood entitled me to everything. His bitter laugh held no humor. How ironic that I don't even have that. He moved toward the door with deliberate steps. This has been most entertaining, but I'm afraid I must cut the performance short. None of your so-called evidence will stand up in court. It's all circumstantial, hearsay, conjecture. Gerald Blackwood. Came a new voice from the doorway. Inspector Graves stood there, flanked by 2 constables. I am arresting you for the murders of Frederick Blackwood and James Harrington. Further charges regarding Victoria Blackwood may follow. Gerald's face showed genuine surprise. Inspector, I thought you had returned to London. At Monsieur Poirot's request, I merely appeared to leave, Graves explained. I've been monitoring this gathering from the adjacent room, where every word has been recorded. As the constables moved forward with handcuffs, Gerald's eyes found Poirot's. The second murder, solving the first, he said softly. Quite clever, detective. I almost wish I could see how it ends. Chapter 11. Echoes and Aftermath. The library seemed larger after Gerald was led away, the space between the remaining occupants stretching with the weight of revelations. Sir Richard stood by the fireplace, a man suddenly aged beyond his years, staring into flames that offered no comfort. I never knew, he murmured. All these years, Victoria raised him as her own, never betraying by word or deed that she knew of my indiscretion. She was a remarkable woman, Dorothy said quietly, prouder than you ever understood. She would rather die than acknowledge the humiliation publicly. Evelyn, who had remained silent throughout Gerald's arrest, finally spoke. But she didn't rather die, did she? She was murdered by the son she chose to protect. Her voice trembled, not with sadness but anger. Everything I believed about our family was a lie. Not everything, mademoiselle, Poirot said gently. Your mother's dignity, your uncle's determination to see justice done, these were genuine. And what of you, Miss Harlow? Diana asked, studying the secretary with new eyes. Will you face charges as an accessory? Inspector Graves, who had returned after supervising Gerald's removal to a waiting police car, cleared his throat. That will depend on the Crown Prosecutor's determination. Withholding evidence is a serious matter, even if motivated by maternal considerations. Dorothy nodded, accepting this with the same composure she had maintained throughout her years at Thornwood. I understand. I have much to atone for. There is one detail that remains unclear, Hastings said, turning to Poirot. The gloves. If Gerald planted them to implicate his father, how did he obtain them? Weren't they buried with Victoria? An excellent question, Poirot acknowledged. One that troubled me greatly until I examined the funeral records. Victoria Blackwood was indeed buried wearing white gloves, but they were not the French kid-skin gloves Mademoiselle Evelyn remembered. Those had disappeared shortly after Victoria's death. Gerald took them, Dorothy confirmed, her voice hollow. As a souvenir, I believe. I discovered them among his possessions years ago, but said nothing. I couldn't bear to consider what it might mean. He kept trophies of his crime, Diana said with a shudder. How perfectly macabre. The theatrical placement of the gloves and newspaper clipping was calculated to create the impression of a ghost story, Poirot explained. To suggest Sir Richard was being haunted by his wife's death, thereby directing suspicion toward him rather than Gerald. Sir Richard sank into his armchair, the proud patriarch now diminished by grief and betrayal. My brother died believing I murdered Victoria, he said brokenly. He went to his grave hating me for a crime I didn't commit. Not quite, monsieur, Poirot corrected. Frederick's suspicions were initially directed at you, yes, but his investigation eventually led him to doubt this conclusion. That is why he hired a private investigator to look into Gerald's affairs. The final entry in his personal journal, found in his desk drawer, indicates he had begun to suspect the truth. Why didn't he come to me? Sir Richard demanded. Would you have believed accusations against your son? Poirot asked gently. Or would you have dismissed them as the ravings of a jealous brother? Sir Richard had no answer for this. Evelyn rose, crossing to her father's side and placing a hand on his shoulder. Despite everything revealed this night, the gesture spoke of a bond that had endured. "What happens now?" she asked, addressing both Poirot and Inspector Graves. "Gerald will stand the trial," Graves replied. "The evidence is substantial. The digitalis in Frederick's decanter, Harrington's hidden copies of the documents, the testimony gathered tonight, along with the financial records showing his desperate situation, it presents a compelling case." "And Thornwood?" Diana inquired, her usual flippancy subdued. "Life continues, mademoiselle," Poirot replied, "though changed, perhaps, by the truth finally brought to light." As the library emptied, its occupants drifting away to process the night's revelations in private, Poirot and Hastings remained behind. The detective stood by the window, gazing out at the moonlit grounds of Thornwood Manor. "You knew about Gerald and Miss Harlow's relationship before tonight, didn't you?" Hastings asked quietly. "I suspected," Poirot corrected. Victoria's diary contained hints, references to watching her replacement move through the house, observations about similarities of gesture and expression between Gerald and Dee that others failed to notice. The final confirmation came when I observed them together, noting the same perfect composure under pressure, a trait passed from mother to son. A composure that concealed very different hearts, Hastings observed. Indeed, the same facade masking. In one case, a mother's tortured love, and in the other, a calculating murderer's cold ambition. Poirot shook his head sadly. Gerald eliminated anyone who threatened his inheritance. First Victoria, then Frederick when he discovered the truth, then Harrington who could verify that truth. All for money, Hastings marveled. For identity, Poirot corrected. The money was significant, yes, but more important was his position as the Blackwood heir. When that identity was threatened, first by Victoria's discovery of his parentage, then by Frederick's investigation, he struck to protect not just his inheritance, but his very sense of self. A soft knock at the library door revealed Winters, as imperturbable as ever despite the night's dramatic events. "Miss Evelyn asks if you would join the family for a nightcap in the drawing-room, sir," he announced. "She says there are matters to discuss regarding the future." Poirot nodded. "We shall join them momentarily." As Winters withdrew, Hastings turned to his friend. "The future. After tonight, can Thornwood ever recover?" "Houses such as this have weathered many storms throughout the centuries," Poirot replied, philosophically. "The Blackwoods who remain must now decide what rises from these ashes, whether the legacy of secrets and lies continues, or a new foundation of truth prevails." He straightened his bow tie with habitual precision. "Come, mon ami. Our work here is not quite finished. There is still the matter of Frederick's will, the document that started this final chapter, and which, I believe, may yet bring some measure of justice to this troubled house." Chapter 12. The Legacy of Truth. The drawing-room of Thornwood Manor held none of its usual grandeur in the small hours of that fateful night. The magnificent space, designed to impress and intimidate, now seemed merely tired. A stage where the final act of an exhausting drama was unfolding. Sir Richard sat with uncharacteristic stillness, his commanding presence diminished by the weight of revealed truths. Evelyn remained close to him, her initial anger gradually giving way to a quieter, more contemplative grief. Diana lounged in her customary spot on the sofa, though her usual sardonic expression had softened into something approaching genuine concern. Dorothy Harlow, no longer able to hide behind her secretary's facade, sat slightly apart, her perfect posture unchanged despite her world having collapsed around her. "You mentioned Frederick's will," Evelyn said as Poirot and Hastings entered. "Did you locate it?" "Indeed," Poirot replied, producing an envelope from his jacket pocket. "While examining Monsieur Harrington's personal effects in London, I discovered this: a copy of the final will, safely preserved in his office safe, away from Thornwood's dangers." "And?" Diana prompted, leaning forward with undisguised interest. "With Inspector Graves's permission, I reviewed its contents." Poirot glanced at Sir Richard. "It is, perhaps, a testament to Frederick Blackwood's true character, a man who sought justice, but not vengeance." He handed the envelope to Evelyn. "As the primary beneficiary, mademoiselle, the honor of reading it should be yours." With trembling fingers, Evelyn withdrew the document and began to read. As she progressed, her expression transformed from trepidation to astonishment. "Uncle Frederick has left me controlling interest in Blackwood shipping," she confirmed, but with explicit instructions that father remain as chairman of the board until he chooses to retire. She looked up in wonder. "He didn't seek to punish you, father. He sought to protect the company while preserving your position." Sir Richard's weathered face registered surprise, then a complex emotion that might have been relief or remorse, or both. "Frederick understood what the company meant to me," he said quietly. "Even believing the worst of me, he showed mercy. There is more." Evelyn continued scanning the document. A substantial trust for Diana, independent of her previous inheritance. Diana blinked for once, genuinely startled. "Why would he do that? We weren't particularly close." "Perhaps," Poirot suggested, "he recognized in you someone who understood what it meant to exist on the periphery of the Blackwood family. Always present, but never fully belonging." Diana's violet eyes met his with uncharacteristic vulnerability, before she quickly masked it with a shrug. "Well, financial independence is always welcome. I might actually leave Thornwood now, perhaps travel to the places I've only read about. And there's a provision for Dorothy," Evelyn continued, her voice cooling as she glanced at the former secretary. "I want nothing from this family," Dorothy said firmly. "I have already taken far too much." "Nevertheless," Evelyn replied, "Uncle Frederick established a modest annuity for you, in recognition of long service and complexities unacknowledged." She looked up from the document. "He knew, didn't he? About you and Gerald." Dorothy nodded slowly. "Frederick discovered the truth during his investigation. He confronted me, not with anger, but with compassion I didn't deserve. He understood that I had been as much a prisoner of Thornwood's secrets as anyone." "And Gerald?" Sir Richard asked, speaking his son's name for the first time since the arrest. Evelyn studied the will. "Any inheritance to Gerald is made contingent upon a full accounting of his financial dealings and regular oversight of his affairs." She looked up, her expression pained. "Uncle Frederick suspected Gerald's criminal activities, but couldn't prove them. This was his attempt to impose some control, a precaution rendered moot by current circumstances," Poirot observed quietly. A somber silence fell over the room, broken only by the gentle ticking of the mantel clock, a sound that had measured Thornwood's hours through generations of Blackwoods, through triumphs and tragedies alike. What becomes of Thornwood now? Hastings asked, giving voice to the question that hung in the air. It continues, Sir Richard replied with sudden determination. Diminished, perhaps. Changed, certainly. But the legacy of Thornwood has never been about just one generation. He turned to Evelyn. Together, we will rebuild what has been broken, not on secrets this time, but on truth. Evelyn reached for her father's hand. Yes, she agreed simply. As dawn broke over Thornwood Manor, Poirot and Hastings prepared for their departure. The household, exhausted by revelation and emotion, had retired to uneasy rest. Only Evelyn appeared to see them off, standing on the great stone steps as Parker brought the car around. "How did you know?" she asked Poirot. "From the beginning. What made you suspect Gerald rather than my father?" "It was your mother's glove, mademoiselle," Poirot replied. "Consider, if your father had murdered your mother, why would he preserve her gloves? Only to orchestrate their discovery 8 years later. It made no sense. But as a manipulation by someone else, someone seeking to redirect suspicion, it was most illuminating. The murder that solved another murder," Evelyn murmured, echoing Gerald's parting words. "Precisely. Had Frederick and Harrington not died, your mother's murder might have remained unsolved forever. It was the second crime that illuminated the first." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Would you write about this case, Captain Hastings?" she asked. "In one of your accounts of Monsieur Poirot's investigations?" Hastings began, but Poirot interrupted, gently. "Perhaps not every truth needs to be shared with the world, mon ami," he suggested. "Some revelations serve justice, but not healing." As their car wound down the long drive away from Thornwood Manor, Hastings glanced back at the grand house, silhouetted against the morning sky. "Do you think they'll recover, Poirot? The family, I mean. Families are remarkably resilient, Hastings. Like gardens after winter, what appears dead often contains the seeds of renewal." Poirot straightened his hat thoughtfully. "Thornwood Manor has witnessed many tragedies, but also courage, dignity, and now, perhaps, redemption. Through truth," Hastings observed. Poirot agreed, his gaze distant. "The little grey cells may solve the puzzle of who and how and why. But it is truth that ultimately heals what deception has wounded. Even when that truth arrives, as in this case, through the most unexpected means. A murder that solved another. Murder," Hastings completed. "Exactement, mon ami, exactement."